you could ask one other thing.
And yeah, it just seems that like they're trying to close off our areas, or as you say in America, our right to assemble. Like they're trying to like plug up the areas, plug up the holes where we can actually talk and discuss these options.
Right.
And politics in Australia, we're rather subdued. I mean, if you burn an Australian flag in the street, most people go, "Man, you're an idiot." But if you do it in America, like you'd have like bikie gangs around to beat the shit out of you.
Yes.
But we're much more passive in our politics, and like people have been saying like this is a really bad thing, but no one seems to give a shit.
Right. Again, I'm not that up to date on what's been going on in Australia. And I would say that the kinds of things you have to do is look for specific instances that can get people outraged. That you need to confront them with real-world examples of where this censorship is going to affect them. And that means also being willing to reach out to communities other than the atheist community, because this is a nationwide problem. Get them all over. Back here.
Yep, I find a lot of religious discussion and the discourse in society and the internet sort of focuses abnormally on America and the Middle East.
We're the most pathological examples of religion out there. That's why.
When sneaking up on this, the majority of the world's soon going to be China, a unified European Union, South America. What's your thoughts on like religious developments in areas like China, Europe, South America, areas?
China clearly, they espouse atheism, so they're kind of, they do have things like Falun Gong and so forth, but religion doesn't seem to be as big an issue there as political ideology.
And some of the rest of Asia as well.
Yes. Europe, of course, is pretty much godless in most places, with a few exceptions.
Right.
So that when I talk to American groups, what I try to get across them is that the European Union is a great model to follow. That it's not a state or a confederation of states that tries to suppress religion. We don't want to do that. But also is fairly independent of religious belief. Is able to function without relying on the crutch of demanding that God sanction everything they do. So I see those as more good role models for us to follow.
What you were speaking about earlier, how over the next 20 years before we end up in the world, how
I'm so optimistic.
how do we diminish sort of or deconstruct the religions and the influence they have in society, the traditional religions of Christianity and so on, sort of as has been happening in the West with Christianity over the past 30, 40 years or so on. How do you then combat the rise of, in the place of that amongst the majority of the population, or at least in sections of it, New Age groups? Because that seems to be the place.
Yes. Right.
It's not institutionalized. It's not a church. It doesn't have anything like that. It just sort of pops out of nowhere and seminars and things.
Yeah. It's like one of the banes of my existence is the Huffington Post, which is supposed to be this bastion of liberalism and progressive political values, and it's this hotbed of New Age lunacy at the same time. It's really, really annoying. I think, though, that part of it is what I talked about earlier, is that critical thinking is essential. That when we see this New Age beliefs, what's happening is that we've got a bunch of people who have managed to get away from the dogma of organized religion, but they don't have the critical faculty, they don't have the intellectual tools to address real-world issues, and so they fall into these traps of New Age thinking, crystal healing, and Reiki, and chiropractic, and acupuncture, and all this other stuff. So again, we start with a foundation. Teach critical thinking skills throughout the public school curriculum, and get people who grow up being good skeptics and who don't swallow the nonsense that the next snake oil salesman tells them. Yeah.
To go back to the gent in the hats question, we've got some examples of things that I find very worrying about Australia. That in the US you have a constitutionally protected separation of church and state, but also a Bill of Rights, and we don't have that here, which is why you find things that would never be allowed, never be tolerated in the US, even by the Supreme Court. Even with Scalia and all of that sitting on there, that we provide huge amounts of funding to private religious schools that teach absolute codswallop bullshit to people. And this was a fetish of our previous government, was directing huge channels of money down these paths. And it seems to me that I'm from Sydney, that when you go out into the outer suburban areas, you people here would be familiar with Hillsong, and maybe you might be as well.
Yes,
they're as obnoxious as the Assemblies of God people, so it's the same kind of thing. But you find these suburbs that are just groupthink mentality along the same lines, and I'm wondering how we counter that with no legal basis, because to challenge this. We sit around spinning our wheels, is what it seems to me.
I would say that, yes, you're right, we have this Bill of Rights, and it's a wonderful document, and I think the great more nations emulated it and so forth. However, in practice, it's often ignored in the United States.
Well, the evangelicals in the Air Force Academy in Colorado and...
yes. And you go into any rural community in the United States, and you will find something very similar to what you described with Hillsong, which you'll find is these charismatic churches that buy up the grocery store and rip out all the shelves and put in folding metal chairs, and now they dominate the community. And this happens all over the place. How we fight it is, again, I think it's a mistake to focus on, well, we've got to get it at the top level. We've got to get the government to have this set of regulations that limit what people can do and state what people's rights are. Because that doesn't work. It helps a little bit when you're bringing things into court. We win all these great court cases against creationism because they are in such clear violation of profoundly stated principles. So it's easy to do that sort of thing. But at the same time, we're not defeating creationism at the grassroots level. And that's where we have to make the difference. And again, I think that whole principle of skepticism, critical thinking, getting that percolating through the communities everywhere. So, another way to think of all you people out there is that you are little seeds that are going to be nucleating these sources of critical thinking in your communities and hopefully spreading up and displacing all the evil weeds of religion and doing your own job. Over here.
Our federal opposition leader, Barnaby Joyce, there's many things that scare me about him, but one of them is he's been appointed now as the Shadow Minister for Finance. Now, he's a dead-set fundamentalist creationist, young earth creationist, and he's waiting for the end days. Now, my problem is I'm fine with that. If that's what he wants, if he wants to have whatever kind of imaginary friend he likes, is fine by me. My problem is that if he's placed in a position as Minister for Finance, God forbid he should get elected, but if he's placed in a position as a Minister of Finance, where can we do something about his personal views that the system should collapse and Israel needs to be back and the 7 seals have to open and all that kind of stuff, and he's actively waiting for this to occur.
Yes.
If he gets into a position of power, or somebody like him, how far can we go to stop them actually sort of carrying out or making happen things? So in the global financial crisis, if he'd been the Minister of Finance in that, it would have been, well, terrific. This is it.
Yeah.
Make it worse.
This is always a dilemma of a democracy and any kind of representative republic, is that we will elect idiots to office, and this is a perfect example. We can't very well put things in place to get rid of people like that without violating democratic principles, and so you're at this trade-off. And you got to figure, if you violate democratic principles in order to get rid of these rascals who want to tout this creationism and so forth, that's a tool that can also be used against you if they come into power. So I kind of lean in favor of, well, we have to live with this. But the amazing thing is that we have electorates that will elect morons like that, and that's where the real problem lies, is getting people educated. Personally, I think that if anybody gets up there and starts talking about the end times, we shouldn't have laws in place that say he cannot become a governor or whatever, but we cannot have a common sense idea in the public that this is a lunatic and we should not elect him. That's what we've got to do is get that attitude going where people recognize that that stuff is irrational. And that's hard. It's going to take a generation at least to get that there. Let's see. Here.
Yeah. Just as a comment on the last two questions, the government is, in a sense, to an extent, a reflection of the population. So, yeah, go after the grassroots level, but the Australian Constitution doesn't have nothing about separation of church and state. You should all write this down, but Chapter 5, Paragraph 116. Look that one up. That's our Establishment Clause.